I think unlike Davos, Davos is a place where only serve their globalist economic agendas. And Davos is so inflated that it's like everyone could come to Davos. But that's not the case in Munich. It is still a very exclusive club of world leaders come here to gather, to talk, and to reach some agreements, consensus. And I think one important point I want to point out is that me as a Chinese, I do feel concerned because you do see there's a very tremendous and tight transatlantic bond among these Westerners. And then there was like Nancy Pelosi. I think she was wearing like either purple or pink. She always had this very fancy dress, and she was like heading toward me. And well, she didn't stare at me, interestingly, because given her very obvious anti-China stance, me as a very identifiable East Asian face or Chinese face, she did not stare at me with like hostile eyes. So she just passed by. Kind of interesting. It turns out that was Theresa May actually, and she was just there, like sort of like a chill neighborhood lady. Very nice it looks. And then I was sitting at the coffee, like the cafe lounge. I was sitting there. Then I saw a guy, sort of the guy just like shuffling around. Was Rishi Sunak. So that was the second UK Prime Minister which I've encountered on that, in that conference. So he didn't have a seat. So he was just like standing there having his coffee with his assistant. So somehow, interestingly, there was another person by my table who know that guy. So she invited that guy to come to our table. So when the Rishi Sunak came to my table, so I was like, "Sir, now this is a Sino and UK table," and he just kind of laughed at me. So now we are just back to the historical average. We are just back to the historical mean, regression to the mean. That now we have a multipolar world. China, Russia. America, maybe EU, and maybe Japan, India, Brazil, Turkey, they are all, pole within the entire international system. Assuming a counterfactual case that now we have around 8 billion people in this world and everyone gets a vote, and they get a vote on what affairs they want to decide in this world and what sort of order they want in this world. My hometown alone will have way more votes, therefore way more say on this matter than the entire nation of Finland. So, honestly, that's why I'm always saying that. We now live in a multipolar world. Marco Rubio said that. Now I'm saying it. I think that's just a fact. As a Chinese, I'm proud of that. I'm proud of my own motherland, having our subs going through that route. But of course, if you think from Americans' perspective, they will be concerned. I think it is their right to concern. If you think from their perspective, they also have the natural right to think from their perspective. That is why I'm always a champion of healthy competition. I love competition, to be honest. I love competition. Like Trump said he loves competition. I do as well.
All right, Kurtis. In the Munich Security Conference, the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio called for a new Western century. Do you see this as a direct civilizational challenge to China?
Of course, it is a very direct and straightforward challenge to China, as happened before. As I always been saying, I think Marco Rubio did a tremendous job. Forgive me for borrowing Trump's term, the tremendous. Basically, I think the American foreign policy establishment, the MAGA foreign policy establishment, they form a closed loop. The stage one was JD's speech last year, 2025, at the Munich Security Conference. JD was basically bashing those Europeans about their decadent society, their retrogressive ideology, and their overburden regulation upon themselves, and obviously lack of industrial competitiveness and the civilizational awareness. So JD bashed these people, but what was the effect? The immediate counter effect was kind of huge. That Europeans were okay, how could this American here lecturing us? But what practically happened was Europeans, after all these long decades of over-relying on the American security guarantees, they started to put the commitment on the defense spending, at least first to 2%, then further pledged to the 5%. That's the NATO baseline right now. And now the stage two is that Marco Rubio came to Munich Security Conference and saying to these European audiences, this whole transatlantic community, that Americans were not leaving the Europeans alone. Instead, what Americans wanted were that America wants to be strong. America wants to revitalize itself. And then it also urges Europeans, which as the civilizational origin of the Americans, to also revitalize and re-strengthen themselves. And in that way, when both sides become more strengthened, more powerful than before, they could forge a better bond, they could forge a stronger bond, stronger community, and also they could coordinate better as a stronger alliance than ever. Like honestly, even me as a Chinese, standing from a neutral perspective, I gotta say Marco Rubio did impressive performance at the Munich Security Conference. I was actually at that conference. You could see all these Europeans, they were like just applauding, and you could feel the vibe that they were not just like applauding for the sake of applauding. I think these people, somehow Marco Rubio's words actually touch upon their hearts, and they could sense that civilizational connection between Americans and the European continent. Honestly, I feel jealous. I do feel jealous. I feel jealous for two reasons. First of all, I think Marco Rubio, as a chief diplomat of the United States, the guy did a tremendous job. The other thing which makes me feel jealous is that me as a Chinese, standing on the other side of the world, I'm sort of worried that the Americans will, after decades of internal decadence, they had their Democrats, they had their crazy DEI policies. Now again, with Trump in power, the whole MAGA movement is exporting their doctrine, exporting their ideology to the European continent, and I think the result is going to be positive for them. So me as a Chinese, I kind of feel jealous. I kind of feel concerned about a stronger alliance between America and Europe. The other point which I do want to point out, because you asked me about Marco Rubio's performance, I was browsing on the internet. I think there was a theory going on that Marco and JD are competing for the ticket on the year 2028. Like honestly, personally, as a personal ideology spectrum, I align more with JD because Marco Rubio is more, the guy is also eloquent, but he's a bit more diplomatic, unlike me and unlike JD. But I think Marco Rubio did tremendous on this one, so he's gonna get some cookie points on that for his 2028 ticket. Yeah.
Okay. So despite the eloquence of the speech, but is that sufficient to repair the substantive damage to the transatlantic relations after Greenland?
I don't think there's like so-called substantial damage, because like some of the commentators, they call this a transatlantic rupture, which I don't think that's the case. Obviously, there was a rupture, but the rupture was between the Trump's MAGA movement, which represents the new blood, the new ideology, the new thoughts in the land of the United States. And now that force is trying to project its will up on the old European continent. The European continent right now is in also a transformational stage, but it's kind of not as transformational as in America right now. What I'm saying here is that basically, if you look at the entire world, I'm not kidding, suffers from one syndrome, one systematic syndrome. It's called gerontocracy. Basically means the old elites, whether in the political, economic, financial, and military arena, they rule the whole world without taking the systematic inputs from younger generations, not even from I think it was like Gen X, people born after 1980s, not even from Gen X or Gen Y, not even to mention the Gen Z. Trump's America, the MAGA 2.0 or Trump 2.0, is actually, ironically, is one of the first movements that is trying to bring upheaval to this global-wide gerontocracy. And Trump somehow succeeded, despite his own age. If you look at his cabinet members, like Marco Rubio, JD, Pete Hegseth, all these people, they are like young bloods, right? So there is a rupture between Trump's MAGA young bloods versus the old and decaying Europe, or you could say dying Europe. So that the establishment Europe is still out there. They are still in power, at least partially, even though their margin of power has been like slowly encroached by these newer forces like the AfD in Germany and Marine Le Pen in France, and we have already seen the Meloni in power in Italy as well, right? So there is a rupture between the new America, or you could call it the new Colossus, versus like the old Europe. But again, the world is a dynamic and changing place. So Europe is also changing. So in the future, we will see more and more alternative voices like AFD, Marine Le Pen coming to power, and all the other sort of like, I'm not gonna call it right wing because right wing has somehow become a negative word, but like more conservative, religion-oriented, family-oriented, culture-oriented parties or political forces come into power in Europe. And when that whole movement comes to materialize, you wouldn't see a rupture. You wouldn't see a clear break within the transatlantic community anymore. And instead, I think when Trump came to power, we have seen Greenland, or even some talk about Canada. But it's the time for Europeans to come to that realization that America now means the business. Trump means business. The MAGA movement actually means the business. Because there's a problem. The fundamental issue with NATO or with America's sort of special relationship with the entire old Europe is that Americans deliberately, after the Cold War or after the World War II, share the entire burden of the NATO. It's like sort of Americans let Europeans to free ride on the security, on the global security order. But now Trump realized that it's time for Europeans to shoulder their own responsibility, at least to shoulder part of their responsibility. While America needs to stay focused, stay committed to NATO, to Europe, Europeans also have to toughen up. They have to also strengthen their own defense capacity, their own defense spending, their own defense commitment, and their own defense productions. Because, I mean, you have to give this guy the credit, the entire Trump movement, that they are the first ones to acknowledge that there is a problem with the past decades of globalization, the past decades of the post-Cold War order, and that order is not going to sustain itself anymore. That order is not going to last long. That order has structural issues. And now we are entering a world of jungle, whether you like it or not. Me as a Chinese, or Russians, or Americans, Europeans, even Japanese, Koreans, I think Trump is one of the first ones to acknowledge that fact and to confront it head on, to prepare for the rule of the jungle. I mean, it sounds harsh, but I think that's just the reality. Now, going back to your original question about the transatlantic community, I think there were some sort of like damage done by Trump, especially his rhetoric about Greenland, but I will make one bold prediction. America will have the de facto control of Greenland, for sure. Especially they will utilize that place for a couple reasons, actually several reasons. First one is the military assets. Trump or the United States needs the Greenland, its military bases, for its missile defense, for its like bomber and fighter attack squadrons to launch from there. So their operational radius is way closer to to places like Middle East and Europe than let's say if the fighter jets or the bomber squadrons were launched from the American homelands. Then the second point is that America now needs that place in order to meet its agenda for reindustrialization. It will need Greenland for like the rare earths, mineral extractions. That is a vast land. I think it's roughly the same size as entire India, right? It's like top 10 in the world in terms of size. So that's a tremendous spot. The third point, which Trump will have the de facto control of that place, is because the Arctic routes. Now, as we see the climate change, the global warming, the Arctic routes is going to be important in the at least in the later half of the 21st century. A lot of the commercial shipping will go through that route, not even to mention the military value of that, because the Chinese subs, Russian subs will also go through that route. I mean, as a Chinese, I'm proud of that. I'm proud of my own motherland, having our subs going through that route. But of course, if you think from Americans' perspective, they will be concerned. I mean, I think it is their right to concern. That is also why I agree with Marco Rubio's comment. I think Marco Rubio also said that in Munich or in other occasion recently. He said that China should take care of their own interests. China have the natural right to concern for their own national sovereignty and national interest. I think that also credit goes to Americans as well, right? Americans, if you think from their perspective, they also have the natural right to think from their perspective. That is why I'm always a champion of like healthy competition. I love competition, be honest. I love competition. Like Trump said he loves competition. I do as well, because even as a Chinese, I don't think Chinese has a natural hatred toward Americans, or Chinese has a historical hatred toward Americans, nor do Americans have a natural hatred toward us, I think. But obviously, I think now as top two most powerful nations in this world, especially we are amid these turbulent times, turbulent era, of course there's going to be like natural competition between China and America. But I think I welcome competition, just as the other side, Americans, they also welcome the competition, because one of the fundamental issues about the post-Cold War order was that our life were just so easy for most of the people. The life just became so complacent. People feel entitled to this tranquil era that you could just like sit in your couch and swipe your TikTok and like browse on Facebook, your entire social media thing, that they think life is without struggles. I mean, now we are just back to the historical reality. Life is a mean place. Thomas Hobbes told us that. I mean, even the Plato, Aristotle, they told us that. I mean, hundreds or even thousands of years ago, plus all these Chinese ancient philosophers, we know that world is a mean place. So the first priority is you gotta survive. In order to survive, you have to always compete, right? I mean, healthy competition is the competition that, China right now is engaging in competition with the United States in terms of economy, technology, culture, like foreign policy, and even in some of the military arena, right? But we don't have to push the competition into the extreme, into the mismanaged competition. We should have a very healthy and managed competition between these two great nations. In that way, think about this. When the Chinese Americans, we are engaging in this hostile, not hostile, but this fierce competition in terms of AI race. But the result of that, no matter which side comes out of that as winner, the entire human species will benefit, because there will be like tremendous progress out of that, right? The AI, we're gonna have like, they call embodied AI, we're gonna have like robotics for everyone, for every household on this living planet. Just think about 60 years ago, like NASA, and the NASA's competition with the Soviet Union. That's how like people, like the human beings landed on the moon, right? I mean, these were like tremendous progress for the mankind. So I think we should welcome that competition. Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of competition, the Munich Security Report also cited China's increasingly coercive behavior, that's the quote, as a source of instability in the Asia Pacific, especially by the Japanese side. Do you see Japan spearheading an anti-China bloc, even if America is not that interested at this moment?
Good question. I'm not quite concerned, to be honest with you, nor I'm quite pissed, because I'm not quite kind of sort of like pissed off by or provoked by that comments, because they're gonna say what they're gonna say. I mean, as a Chinese, I'm a realistic Chinese. I know that for the ongoing decades, the Western rhetoric, I think it will be, plus their allies, like Japan or South Korea, their rhetoric will be anti-China. I think that's for sure, because now we are clearly seeing a dividing line in this world, that there will be like two camps, right? One, I think, is the Western alliance plus the Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, all these nations, Australia, India, maybe. And then there's another camp which you could call Global East, which is us, and maybe North Korea, Russia, Iran. That one I'm not sure, but you know what I mean, right? So the rhetoric is going to be anti-China. But I mean, the state of competition does not mean we have to go to extreme. And also, I think we Chinese have we have huge tolerance for that. We don't have to have a very pinched nerve that whenever someone barks at us, or whenever someone drops the word salad or the word bomb on us, we're gonna be we're gonna just feel so agitated. But going back to the reality right now, in terms of this confrontational gesture, I would speak about Japan. I was actually in the room when the Japanese defense minister, the new guy, interestingly, he was my alumni from Columbia, by the way. It's very interesting. But he was literally standing on the stage. I was sitting in in the second or the first row. He said about like Japan's new defense posture. Couple of things. First of all, the guy, consciously, he said that. He said he was born in Kanagawa Prefecture. That place was where Americans, their 7th Fleet, is one of the home port of the American 7th Fleet, which could harbor at least like 2 American carrier strike groups. So it's like a forward base in the East Asia. He said he was born in that place. So for his standing point of view, that the transatlantic security is inseparable from the Indo-Pacific security. So he was basically aligning these 2 nations, these 2 oceans, those 2 defense parameters of these 2 vast oceans as one, as unified. So he was signifying his intention to stay closer to the NATO alliance. So as a matter of fact, if NATO one day does expand more, even to the Asian continent, I bet Japan is going to be one of the first to join that club, okay? No doubt. The second thing that he said about like his commitment and his Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's commitment to raise the defense expenditure to 2%, then maybe even further to like 3.5%, that's going to be tremendous. Think about this. I think Japan is like number 4 or number 3 GDP in this world. So when they increase their GDP to their defense expenditure to like 3.5% of GDP, that's going to be tremendous. And we should be concerned. The third point he said about like Japan will ramp up its defense production. He said Japan was also coordinating with the European nations under they have a program called like Next Gen. It's like 6th generation fighter jets. We don't know like when that project will materialize into the reality, but I think these are all very clear signals that I think Japan is preparing for war, preparing for confrontation, which, I mean, honestly, I don't blame them for that. Like, as I said, I think each nation have their own concerns or their own interests, because I think what for Japan is quite interesting in their situation is that they climbed all the way up to the top 2 in the world back in the 90s. Then Americans had these Plaza Agreement, and they launched a trade war, just as Americans launched a trade war to us back in 2018. They launched a trade war against Japan back in 1980s, so Japan was sort of crushed. So their economy had these lost decades where young people had no prospect about the bright future, where the economy has been stagnated for like 2 decades at least. So when you see an aging society and where the young people had no future, had no prospect, obviously I think one of the easiest way for the politicians to mobilize the support will be like vowing for war, right? So I don't blame them for that. But as a Chinese, I gotta take my own stance on that. Obviously, if Japan goes all the way to my home yard, we're gonna respond to that, right? But I think the concerning signal is that Japan is not just actively ramping up their own defense production, changing their own constitutional laws to be ready for a direct, major power conflict in the Asia Pacific. More importantly, Japan is vowing closer and closer to the NATO alliance. So now you could see, I think we could see the prelude to the World War III is coming out there. I mean, we don't know if the World War III will be fought in what manner or in what year, but you could see that basic posture is showing out there. The entire Eurasian continent is now connected. All the way to the west, we have the Russo-Ukrainian conflict. In the Middle East, you have the Iran, you have the Israeli and Hamas, and the Palestinian conflict. And now that region conflict is potentially going to the East Asia, maybe in the East China Sea, maybe in the Taiwan Strait, and maybe in the South China Sea with Philippines as well, or even like skirmishes with Australia. So we could see now is year 2026. We are entering an era of turbulence. We are entering an era of transformation. And be honest with you, I'm actually feel a bit excited. I mean, I know it sounds lunatic to say that, in such chaotic times, but I think the chaotic era, the chaotic times is where it breeds the heroic virtues of human species. And that is where humans can shine the best about their own talents. That is where human beings can unlock the vast potential of their creative genius, of their innovative capacity. The world has been stagnating for so long, as I'm saying here. Just take one very concrete example. If you ever fly the commercial jets, which I do very often, the Boeing 737 or the Boeing 747, Boeing 747, its first flight was actually 1969, I believe, back in Seattle or Renton, Washington State. That's where I went to college. So that has been almost 60 years. And Boeing 737, which is one of the most frequent flight, like the short or medium range commercial jet, was also born like back in the 60s or even earlier. We don't see that much upgrades. So most of the technologies which we have right now, the hardware technology were mostly born after the World War II, but not later than 1980s. So the hardware technology has been stagnating for at least 4 decades or so, and I'm not the first person to point out that. Peter Thiel, the founder of the PayPal, the guy also said that. And by the way, he's also a signature person of the counter-elite movement right now. He also said that, don't trust in these just like these Silicon Valley people like Jensen Huang. They give you very nice PPTs or they give very tremendous presentations, but all their technology were mostly based on semiconductors, basically like the circuits technology that I think dated all the way back to 1940s or 1950s. Then the internet, the internet, which is the entire foundational structure of these digital giants, even Amazon, like Facebook, which they call Meta right now, or even Google. The foundational technology was, I think, developed by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency of the U.S. Defense Department, which is now called the War Department, back in 1950s or 1960s. So now we are engaged in this fierce competition in this world, geopolitical competition, economic competition, financial competition, like political competition. But it is only through these fierce competitions that we will see more human genius rise from that and more creative capacity out of that.
Okay. Speaking of competition, the European Union designated China as a systemic rival. Do you think China and the European Union are systemic rivals?
I have to say this, as I always say, I'm a very loving person. I'm a very genuine and sort of like I'm an understanding person. I try to, even if I'm a Chinese, but as I said, I try to understand other people from their own perspectives, right? I try to be real. I try to be objective and be neutral. But Europeans is which I do not understand. Just be honest. I mean, it's like how on the earth they could right now call themselves as a systematic rival to China. Let's list out several different spectrums. First is economic. European economy, their GDP growth rate, I think even after financial crisis was even almost near to negative. And China was having, like very high digit growth, almost even double digit growth. Even now we have been slowing down, but still we have a 5% to 6% range. Europe has been stagnating. Not even stagnating, they have been like retrogressing. Now it goes to the industrial technology. Germany used to champion, that was 10 years ago, Germany used to champion this so-called industry 4.0. But now it was only China that has been materializing the industry 4.0. China has been succeeding on that. We acquired their industrial robotics company called KUKA. There's a Chinese company called Midea which acquired them, and we scaled them up. We scaled the industrial robotics up. So that's why China now has those called like, it's called like dark light factories, which means it could run on 24/7 and without light at the night because it's like mostly AI driven with the robotics. But what do Europeans have? Europeans have been shutting down. You have seen the news. They have been shutting down the Volkswagen plants. The Porsche and Mercedes, they've been aborting their expansion plans. They have been aborting their transformation to EV because they realized that the Chinese competition was so fierce that they couldn't confront that challenge. So the only thing Europeans did in terms of like slowing down the Chinese industrial progress was to put the heavy tax or the non-tariff barriers on the Chinese imports to the European Union. Then the third point I would say is about the political. China is a very stable civilizational state with a very stable and centralized, powerful, consolidated government with very stable governance. Europe, what exactly is Europe, or they call Europa? I think it's just it's a virtual and constructive, it's a virtually constructive entity, political entity sitting in Brussels. But God knows what exactly is command center, or if it ever has one coordinated command center. even their currency, the euro, has been seeing that much tremendous crisis. You have seen the debt crisis in the they call the PIGS nations, like Portugal and Greece and all these places. And now going to the last spectrum of the competition is military. China right now, I think, is a pure competitor, which Americans acknowledge that. In terms of the military capacity, China is a pure competitor with the United States. We have in terms of the size of the fleet, the vessels, China is bigger than the United States. And in terms of the newer technologies, China has the biggest and most advanced stockpile of the ballistic missiles in the world. We have these DF-26, DF-21, some of them called the carrier busters. It's hypersonic missiles. Europeans has none. And then China has the newest type of the destroyers, which we call 055. As a matter of fact, by the Western standard, they are not even the destroyers anymore. They should be classified as cruisers, which very few nations right now in the world has it. China has it, Americans have it. I don't know whichever other nations have it. I mean, Russians have it, but sort of outdated. China has the most cutting edge ones. And we have our own nuclear subs and with like the sea-launched ballistic missiles up on it. And now we have 3 carriers in operation. And obviously we are building our 4th and 5th one, likely even to be nuclear. And they are huge. As you could see, our Type 003, the Fujian carrier, is I think it's 80,000 tons plus displacement. Europeans has none. So I don't know, on that regard, Europeans could call themselves or call China the systematic rival to them. I mean, God bless them. I think they do have some nostalgia about their past. So obviously, I don't take that one seriously. But I think what I do take seriously is that with the newer blood coming into power in Europe, as I said, AfD, Marine Le Pen, and Meloni, and the entire new generations of more conservative leaders in Europe rising up, I think Europe does have the potential. So if they start to transform their society, if they start to unlock their potentials in that continent, and then align with the Americans in terms of the political and security objective, that will be a huge challenge to both China and to Russia. So, but as I said, I welcome the competition because it is only through the competition that we could see more creative genius out of it. I don't know if you have a follow-up question on the euro, but I think that's sort of the like bigger picture which I have right now. Yeah.
Okay, if the European Union cannot compete with China, do you see them finding their relevance by escalating the conflict in Ukraine?
They are doing that exactly. As a matter of fact, I'll just tell you one interesting point. I've actually spoke with a German lady last year at an international conference, and that German lady, I think she was from a sort of like higher end German family. Mm-hmm. I said, "Are you concerned about the Russian advance on the Eastern Front?" She was like, "There is no Russian advance on the Eastern Front." She was like, "It's all about these media." I think she represents one stream of idea in Europe. But also when I was in Germany, I also heard other ideas that other people were saying that they were so concerned because he said from Russia to Berlin, they said there was like only 20 minutes window time for them to respond. So they were like truly concerned. So I think the point here is this. Some of the Europeans, they do feel concerned. And some of the Europeans, they may be the, how you call the opportunist. They will try to explore the opportunity in the Russo-Ukrainian conflict so that couple of things. So first of all, they will gain the maximum political and economic advantage for themselves. And secondly, from a more holistic picture, they could bring the Europe, which, as I said, is a decaying continent, is a dying Europa, back into the world stage by exploiting the situation, by dragging the Americans into it, by drawing down the Russians into it, by even tying the Chinese into it. But honestly, Ukraine is I think it's at least 3,000 miles from China's border, right? So if you ask me what is China's huge concern about it, realistically speaking, Ukraine is not a primary concern for China, but Europeans of course want to bring China into it. But I think the condition which they gave was not reciprocal. Europeans were always like, "Oh, China, you should pressure Russia." Well, even if China pressures Russia, but why would China do that for you? what reciprocal things you have brought on the table? You did not. Europeans, they do live in the nostalgia. But as I said, we cannot ignore the possibility, or we cannot ignore the potentiality that they want to exploit this situation. The way they exploit this situation is bring all these big nation states, Americans, Russians, Chinese, into the entire war, sucking everyone into it. There's a historical analogy that was written by the Thucydides in the, I think it's the Peloponnesian War. There were, like, in the ancient Greek, there were basically two powerful states, Athens and Sparta. Athens and Sparta were, they were sort of in a competition. But the final outcome, which they engaged in a protracted and existential struggle, was partially fueled, partially accelerated or amplified by these middle powers or even smaller states, which want to exploit this situation, want to like bring these two powers into the conflicts for their own gains. We are also seeing that very dangerously in the Asia Pacific as well. I will list two political entities. First one is Philippines. Philippines is such an insignificant small nation situated on the South China Sea, but obviously their proactive behaviors were trying to first appeal to the American masters, and secondly, trying to draw the Americans and Europeans into this dangerous fight with China, which is very risky. I would urge as a Chinese to our Americans and European counterparts that do not take the bait. And secondly, the second political entity which sits in the Asia Pacific and that is becoming increasingly risky, that is potential to trigger another new round of major power kinetic warfares, is Taiwan. The island of Taiwan, their whole independence movement, the DPP, these people are just crazy. Like, they are just literally intentionally trying to provoke the mainland China. Even me as a Chinese, I would love my compatriots on Taiwan because I know they are also like me, they are ethnic Chinese, right? They are technically Chinese. But now you could see the DPP forces is getting increasingly outrageous. And they have elected a VP. That VP, I don't think she's not even Taiwanese. I think she's a mixture of Americans and Japanese. I think she was born in Japan, in American military bases or around the American military bases in Japan. That itself says something about it, and I bet her English is actually better than her Chinese or better than her Taiwanese dialect. Because, I think people should speculate if she's actually Taiwanese or if she's actually acting on behalf of the best interests of Taiwan people or on the stability of the Taiwan Strait. These issues are the fundamental concerns which we have to think about. So, as I said, not just Europe. The entire world right now is, will quickly be on fire. So it is our utmost duty to manage the fire or even to prevent the fire from breaking out.
Right. President Trump recently confirmed that he will be visiting China in April. What do you think will be on the agenda?
Great. I think, I was actually very interesting. I was, me as a Chinese, but I was also always, listening to these American establishment podcasts. I was just listening to Jake Sullivan. By the way, I like this guy. I mean, he's, even though he's a Democrat, but I think the guy is very eloquent, very cold-mannered, calm-mannered, and he's very smart, you could see. He was also talking about there's going to be multiple chances for President Xi and President Trump to meet this year. There's going to be an April visit, then there's going to be like G20, then there's going to be APEC. So they have at least multiple chances to meet with each other. I think that's, first of all, that's great, because how do you maintain the fundamental stability in this increasingly turbulent world? Is that two most powerful nations, their leaders should meet with each other with grace, right? With gratefulness. So April, I think two things. First one is a good vibe. I think Trump is going to bring good vibe to China, as he always does. And I do think our great leader, President Xi, will also have some reciprocal welcoming to President Trump as a nation, the nation's guest visit. Then I think there's going to be concrete agendas on the item. I'm sure they're going to, some people speculate about the grand bargain. I wouldn't use that comic term or that grandizing term, but I do think there's going to be some concrete agendas. I think the very least one is that China and the United States should open some sort of hot communication line that to prevent the military engagement in places like hotspots like South China Sea or even Taiwan Strait to spiral out of the control, because if that spirals out of the control, will be disastrous and will be truly consequential to the entire world, right? We don't want that. Then the other things, we could have trade deal, we could have like technology competition rules, the managed competition. You know, China and the USA are engaged in this very fierce tech competition, or some even call it a tech war, right? Americans have export ban on us in terms of the compute chips. Maybe we could have some like reciprocal deals on that. And then there's issues around Taiwan. You know, how would Americans manage the crisis in the Taiwan Strait? Especially, how would Americans, you know, to constrain these outrageous DPP leaders on the island of Taiwan? I do think Trump will be happy to do that for us. I mean, God bless him. And then there's like all other spectrum of the engagements that Americans could have with China. So again, you know, I'm not the leader of China, but I do think the two great leaders of these two great nations will have some concrete agendas out of it. And even if not very specific agenda items, at least the good vibe does showcase the stability on this earth, right? At least, you know, the year 2026, we're gonna have a very peaceful, harmonious, and happy year.
Okay, so suppose the renewal of the Western alliances that Marco Rubio has promised occur, and China is unable to face it. Do you have any critique of the Chinese foreign policy?
You said about China is not able to face it?
I mean, suppose if China faced this challenge, do you have any critique of the Chinese foreign policy?
Okay, first of all, as a Chinese, I don't want to say I have a critique about my own country's foreign policy, because it is not my term to critique. But I do want to point out certain points here. I think, first of all, China has to acknowledge the challenge head on. We can't just keep putting our head in the sand and pretending that the world is still a peaceful place, that the world is still in this mode of hyper-globalization, which we have witnessed after the end of the Cold War, the past 3 decades, you know, the tremendous high growth around the world. We have seen the systematic flaws of this hyper-globalization. We have seen the economic inequality. We have seen the illegal mass flow of migrations. We have seen the rise of nationalism and populism, and we have seen these like geopolitical conflicts all arising out of this hyper-globalization, which had these very own inherent flaws, right? We cannot just put our head in the sand anymore and pretend that the world is still the same. That's the first point. And secondly, we have to be brave and bold enough to embrace the challenge. Now, Americans, Europeans, and even Japanese, they are all ramping up their war drum. And they are saying this explicitly in front of us physically, in front of us on the TV, in front of us on the social media channels. They are saying this explicitly. So the collective consciousness of the entire Western world is preparing for the, you know, protracted conflict. China should also get ready for that. We should prepare that militarily, strengthen our defense capacity, strengthen our defense training, strengthen our defense coordinations with our own allies. Secondly, we should also get ready for the conflict mentally, as a mental default, that we can't pretend that we are still living in this harmonious world. I think every and each Chinese, we should have that mindset that, you know, anything could happen tomorrow, and we should get ourselves ready for that, to embrace that challenge, to embrace the conflict head on. We don't seek conflict. We don't seek war with other nations. We are a peace-loving nation. But if the trouble does come to us, we have to properly respond. The third point which I want to make is that I think China should truly grab the allies. The Western nations, Americans, NATO, Japanese, Philippines, even India, they are now trying to form these even closer and closer groupings of allies. What should China do? China should also form our own circle of actual allies. You know, not just the nations which have like good trade deals with us or have good commercial deals or even the good diplomatic ties with us. I think we should truly identify, locate, and secure the actual allies which we can depend and rely on. Maybe Russia is one, maybe North Korea is one, but we need more. And in that process, I mean, as if you were in a geopolitical chessboard, as a player, as a dominant player in that geopolitical chessboard, forgive me if I'm borrowing the Brzezinski's term on that geopolitical chessboard, you have to drive the wedge on your inside your counterparts. Our counterparts are Americans, Europeans, but we should drive the wedge inside them, because for example, there are some domestic fashions within the United States that maybe they are still panda huggers. We should utilize them, we should leverage them to create the influence within the USA that is more favorable to China. Within Europe, there will be certain politicians in the EU Commission or the EU Parliament, and there will be certain nations in Europe that is more leaning toward China. I mean, Serbia is one. That's a great, tremendous example. Maybe Hungary is also one. We should leverage that as well. So my fundamental point is, I think China is a very powerful nation, very strengthful nation. The only thing China should sort of change is its posture, is its own ideological tuning, that we should transform from a peace mindset to a mindset of confrontation, of conflicts, of turbulence, of great historical transformation. We are literally living in that era of great historical transformation where everything could happen. So let's seize the opportunity. Think about this. Over 100 years ago, China was still ruled by the Manchu Empire, the Qin dynasty. China was so weak that the Western nations could just send a couple regiments and they could, bully China. That past age has been gone since the founding of our People's Republic. We have defeated the Americans or the UN coalition forces in the Korean Peninsula, and that was 70 years ago. Can we do it again? Of course. Now we have even more tremendous weapons. We have more people. We have stronger economy. We have more advanced technology, and we have even way brighter talents. So we are able to do it. Of course, as I said, we don't seek for war, but if war does come, let's get ready for it. Let's bring up the competition.
There has been a debate in the Western community about the merits of multipolarity versus multilateralism. Which model do you think is better for China?
I would go with multipolarity all the way. A couple points here. First of all, Marco Rubio, I'm interested in the Marco Rubio again. The guy actually said this. I think back in the last year, 2025, early, I think it was February or March, he actually said that the multipolar world is back. He said the moment in which America was the unipolar power in the world, that was like, it was a very rare case in the historical span. Because thousands of years of the human history, the unipolar moment was very rare. So now we are just back to the historical average. We are just back to the historical mean, regression to the mean, that now we have a multipolar world. China, Russia, America, maybe EU, and maybe Japan, India, Brazil, Turkey, they are all, pole within the entire international system. And then what is multilateralism? The sheer difference between multipolarity and multilateralism was actually introduced, I think, publicly by a guy called Stubb. I think the guy is the president of Finland. He actually said that, I think, in a speech, in a talk. He said that we don't want the multipolar world, we only want the multilateralism world. And he said the reason why is that multipolar world means each nation have the corresponding strength and spheres of influence that is proportional to their own strength and power. But he said, Finland as a small nation and plus all the other small nations or the middle power nations, they don't want to see the big power, coerce them. So they want to have multilateralism. But let's say this. I mean, in the world of rule of jungle, not in the rule of jungle, for the past decades, where have you guys been? When you guys were, living comfortably under this global structure of hyper-globalization, you guys didn't say anything about the multipolar world, nor the multilateralism. And now suddenly, when the American empire was retreating from the global map, and then the other rising powers are taking a rightful claim of their shares in this world, Now you guys, suddenly, which have never shared any substantial responsibility to this global order, now suddenly saying that we want a multilateral world. Be honest. I think it's not, I think that's a fact that the population of Finland is actually smaller than the population of my home city, of my hometown. So if let's go all the way to the pure procedural democracy, let's assume in a counterfactual case that now we have around 8 billion people in this world and everyone gets a vote. And they get a vote on what affairs they want to decide in this world and what sort of order they want in this world. My hometown alone will have way more votes, therefore way more say on this matter than the entire nation of Finland. So, honestly, that's why I'm always saying that. We now live in a multipolar world. Marco Rubio said that. Now I'm saying it. I think that's just a fact. For the small nations, of course, we the big nations, we don't want to be the big bullies. We don't want to bully other people. But it is also not right that you want to free ride us on this international system because you are not part of the architect on building up this international system or crafting up the new order to come. You are not part of that. Did you contribute any significant share of it? Did you contribute any significant manpower, resources, technology, economy, even military capacity? None. So of course, I'm all into this multipolar world because when you look at the multilateral organizations like UN, God forbid, but what did UN do to actually prevent these atrocities happening around the world? What did UN actually do, or what were UN even able to do to prevent this conflict, or even to resolve this conflict in the Middle East, in the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, even in the Sudan and South Sudan? UN is pretty much useless. I don't want to be too harsh on it, but I think we all know that UN is pretty much a very useless organization right now. So that's the reason why when we say about Trump's Board of Peace, some people think that guy is a lunatic, but now I see it in the other way. I'm not projecting that of course, I think Trump's Board of Peace is sort of an impulsive project that naturally coming out of his own character, his own personality. But if we read a history book, after the Treaty of Versailles, after the end of the World War I, Woodrow Wilson proposed the idea of the League of Nations, right? The League of Nations, which was a precedent to the UN, which we have today. When we read the history book, when I first read about the League of Nations, my mental construct, my mental image was also that, okay, this was a very legitimate organization that had the consensus from major powers back then. That's what I thought. But honestly, think about this. Isn't today's Board of Peace also another League of Nations? You might say it is a premature organization. It is not a complete and comprehensive organization. But so was the League of Nations. So what I'm saying here is that, Trump is a historical figure. And the League of Nations, just like today's Board of Peace, it might not succeed, but you can't just treat it as not existing or as a funny joke or something. So back to our conversation about multilateralism, what I'm trying to say is that multilateralism has been failing us. It's not going to work. Multipolar world, I think instead, what I like about this order is that each country, you have to share the burden of your own responsibility. You have to speak up, stand up, and toughen up for your own national interest. So that prevents some of the nations to free ride on others. NATO was a huge example. That's why you were talking about the transatlantic rupture. Because, willingly or voluntarily, NATO was an organization where the European nations free-rided the Americans, and that's why Americans are pulling back their commitments. They're trying to restructure the NATO. So if today, in this disintegrating old order, we are now still talking about multilateralism, that just gives some of the nations another excuse or another opportunities to free ride on this newly emerging world order, which is, it's not just unfair, it will also bear the disastrous consequences which we have seen before. Globalization was one, NATO was one, the transatlantic community was one. Do you actually want to repeat the mistake again and in an even grander scale? Because recall this, NATO was only about the Western nations, and now the entire world order, you want to have that free riding components into it, you will only bear the fruits of a way bigger problem in the decades to come.
All right. On a lighter note, Kurtis, what are the most interesting encounters you have in the Munich Security Conference?
Oh, that was very interesting, actually. A lot of them, actually. I just give you a couple. I actually met a guy, the President Stube. I was talking about this Finnish president.
Okay.
Somehow in the on the hallway. I actually want to say hi to this guy because I just bought his book. His new book, I think, something about like a triangular relationship in the new world. He was basically categorizing the world as like global West, global East, and the global South. It's actually an interesting read. So I saw this guy. I actually want to talk with him, but because he had like a lot of security guards around, so I didn't approach this guy. I was actually going to say, hey, excuse me, sir, I just bought your new book. Maybe you should give me a selfie. That was my initial thought, but anyway. And then I was in that hotel. I was like climbing up the store. Then I saw actually seems like a very nice lady, a nice, mid-age or old-age lady. I mean, she's not old, but I mean at least mid-age lady with gray hair. So my initial reaction, because I was like also like hustling on the hallway, I thought, oh, is that Janet Yellen, the former U.S. Treasury Secretary? It turns out wow, that was Theresa May actually, and she was just there, like sort of like a chill neighborhood lady, very nice it looks. And then I was sitting at the coffee, like the cafe lounge. I was sitting there. Then I saw a guy, sort of the guy just like shuffling around. Was Rishi Sunak. So that was the second UK Prime Minister which I've encountered on that, in that conference. So he didn't have a seat. So he was just like standing there having his coffee with his assistant. So somehow, interestingly, there was another person by my table who know that guy. So she invited that guy to come to our table. So when the Rishi Sunak came to my table, so I was like, sir, now this is a Sino and UK table. And he just kind of laughed. I mean, yeah, kind of funny. And also, I think I bumped into the von der Leyen a couple times. Of course, she had like very tense guards, but she was just passing by me. I think 3 feet away. And then there was like Nancy Pelosi. I think she was wearing like either purple or pink. She always had this very fancy dress, and she was like heading toward me. And well, she didn't stare at me, interestingly, because given her very obvious anti-China stance, me as a very identifiable East Asian face or Chinese face, she did not stare at me with like hostile eyes. So she just passed by, kind of interesting. All the other bunch of interesting people, like Japanese defense minister, the guy was like just sitting in front of me at a podium. So I actually searched about this guy, kind of interesting. He was my alumni at Columbia. So we went to the same school, but somehow now our path sort of converges again. Kind of interesting. And after the guy sitting in front of me, he went to the podium and he started his speech about ramping up the Japanese defense production, Japanese defense capacity, Japanese defense expenditure, and the coordination with the Western allies, which is also, to me, quite interesting as well. You just could see like bunch of familiar faces, faces which you mostly see on the TV or on the social media or the internet. It was so vivid. Oh, by the way, I saw one lady. I'm not a fan of her, but I did see her, and well, her accent. Honestly, I think I wouldn't say she has a funny accent, but I think she has a very noticeable accent. The AOC. AOC was also there. I saw her at the lobby, the first floor. Kind of interesting. Who else? I think. Oh, Zelensky was there, but I didn't see him like personally because the guy has like such fortified guards with him. Like once the guy came to the conference, it was like everyone was sort of like their nerve sort of like stood up because given what's been happening between Russia and Ukraine and all these things. But so, again, I mean, there were a lot of encounters like that at the Munich Security Conference. I think it sort of impressed me because I think unlike Davos is a place where only serve their globalist economic agendas. And Davos is so inflated that it's like everyone could come to Davos. But that's not the case in Munich. It is still a very exclusive club of world leaders come here to gather, to talk, and to reach some agreements, consensus. And I think one important point I want to point out is that me as a Chinese, I do feel concerned because you do see there is a very tremendous and tight transatlantic bond among these Westerners. Even though we see the political ruptures that's been happening between them, but you could still see they speak the same language, they speak the same tone, they have the same sort of mindsets. That is very distant away from us East Asians or from us Chinese. So me as a Chinese, I feel like we do have a long way to go. China should broaden our international appeal. We should have more Chinese standing on the global stage and broadcasting our voice to the entire world. And at least to have constructive dialogues to these Westerners. So that even if the worst outcome will materialize one day, at least before that happens, both sides, we could have laid out our opinions to each other in a more clear fashion to avoid the miscalculation, to avoid the misjudgment. So again, I think Munich Security Conference was a very tremendous experience, and I'm very much looking forward to it again. It was very exciting, I think very memorable.